He didn't even pause before saying it. We all agreed don't come to the wedding. Just like that, my son erased me from my own grandson's life. No reason, no apology, just a polite execution over the phone. A week later, one bank. Transfer changed everything. Suddenly, he was crying, begging, saying he didn't know the full story. But by then, I wasn't just his mother anymore. I was the woman holding the power they never thought I'd use. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe. And please tell me and others, what's one life lesson everyone should hear before it's too late? Share it in the comments below. Thanks. I was in the backyard trimming my rose bushes when my phone buzzed in the pocket of my cardigan. I wiped my gloves on my apron and answered without checking the caller ID because only one person ever calls me anymore. My son, Caleb. Hey, Mom, he said, and his voice already had that tone. Flat but pretending to be calm, like he'd rehearsed what he was about to say. I just wanted to let you know, Ethan's wedding is Saturday. We all talked and agreed it's probably better if you don't come. I didn't say anything, not because I was shocked, because I wasn't. Something in my gut had been preparing me for this for weeks. I just waited, letting the silence make him squirm. He added, It's not personal. Jenna said it might be too overwhelming for you, with your memory stuff. My memory stuff. I almost laughed. I'm 72, not a corpse. I still manage my own finances, cook every meal from scratch, and have never once forgotten a birthday. But Jenna, the perfect daughter-in-law, with the cold smile and glass voice, had been planting this seed for months. I could feel it. I didn't even ask what we all meant. I already knew. Jenna. Probably Ethan, too. Maybe even that simpering cousin of hers who calls herself a family therapist after one online certificate. It's what Ethan wants, Caleb added like that was supposed to soften the blow. I thought of Ethan at age 5 hiding behind my legs during thunderstorms, whispering that I made him feel safe. At 10, when I took him to a Cubs game, and he called it the best day of his life. At 16, when I co-signed his car loan because Caleb said he couldn't afford it that month. But apparently, at 25, Ethan wanted a wedding without his grandmother. I looked up at the sky and saw 2 hawks circling high above the sycamore tree, silent and uncaring. Okay, I said, and hung up. I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand, until the screen went black. Then I went inside, took the invitation off the fridge, and dropped it in the trash. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I opened the freezer, pulled out a batch of cookie dough I'd prepped for the wedding favors lemon sugar with white chocolate chips, and slid them into the oven like nothing had happened. The kitchen filled with the scent of citrus and vanilla, same as it always had during holidays and birthdays, and every time Ethan visited as a boy. I sat at the table sipping tea from my chipped World's Best Grandma mug and stared at nothing. When the cookies were done, I packed them neatly in a Tupperware container, tied a ribbon around it, and walked it down the block to the porch of Caleb's house. I left it by the door with a sticky note that said, "For the celebration." I didn't knock. I didn't want to see their faces. I walked home in silence, not sure if I felt more like a ghost or a fool. That night I turned my phone on silent and watched the light blink with incoming messages I never opened. The worst kind of betrayal isn't loud. It's quiet, careful, and dressed up as love. And I knew in that moment, if I was being erased from my own family's story, I'd be damned if I went quietly. The morning after Caleb's call, I sat on the porch with my coffee and watched the neighborhood wake up like it always did. Same joggers, same dog walkers, same delivery trucks, but everything felt different. There's a certain kind of silence that follows being cut out of your own family, like you're watching your life through a thick pane of glass, and nobody notices you've gone missing. I thought about the years I spent giving up pieces of myself so Caleb could have a life I never had. I was 26 when his father died in a factory accident, and I never remarried. Not because there weren't chances, but because I didn't want Caleb to ever feel like he came second to someone else. I worked double shifts at the diner, then cleaned houses on weekends. Every dollar went toward keeping him in private school, so he wouldn't have to grow up like I did, dodging eviction notices and eating saltine dinners. I remember him coming home once at age 11 beaming because he'd won a science award and saying I told everyone my mom is the smartest person I know. I held on to that for years, even when he stopped saying things like that. Jenna came into the picture about 10 years ago. She was polite, always smiled too much, but had a way of twisting conversations just slightly so you left feeling like you'd done something wrong. The first time she came over for dinner, she said my meatloaf tasted very nostalgic, like it belonged in a museum. I laughed it off. But then she started suggesting Caleb handle my prescriptions, asked if I had a lawyer, started hinting I should consider assisted living before a fall forces the issue. I brushed it all off as concern. Stupid me. I didn't see it for what it was until it was too late. 3 years ago, I got pneumonia and ended up in the hospital for 8 days. My goddaughter Ava, who works in finance, came to stay with me afterward. She's not blood, but she's always been more of a daughter than Jenna could dream of being. She's the one who convinced me to set up a proper estate plan, put protections in place. She connected me with a lawyer, helped me draft a living trust. I insisted on keeping Caleb as primary beneficiary back then because I still believed he'd do right by me. But Ava made sure to include what she called a kill switch clause. If certain conditions were met, I could reallocate the entire trust without permission. I remember her saying, "You need a way to protect yourself if love turns into leverage." At the time, I thought it sounded too dramatic. But now it's the only reason I still have any power left. The trust currently holds just over $1.2 million money I've scraped together through decades of smart saving, selling a rental property, and investing a life insurance payout I got after Tom died. Caleb knows it exists. So does Jenna. They've both been counting on it, I'm sure, quietly planning their future around money they never earned. Ethan's house down payment was scheduled to come out of it, along with Caleb's retirement cushion. But they forgot something critical. When you make someone feel like they're nothing, you better pray they don't remember they still have the power to change everything. I spent that entire morning reviewing my documents. I pulled out my safe box, looked over the signatures, checked the clauses. Ava was right. I could remove them both and redirect the funds with just 2 notarized forms. And I had someone else in mind, not as punishment, as proof. Proof that I existed, that I mattered, that I wasn't just a footnote in their perfect little wedding. Album. I called Ava that afternoon. She picked up on the second ring and said, "What did they do?" I told her everything. The phone call, the note, the silence. She didn't ask twice. "Okay," she said. "Then let's remind them who they underestimated." By sundown, we had a meeting booked with the attorney. And for the first time in days, I slept soundly. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because now I had a plan. 2 days before the wedding, I stood in the grocery store staring at a box of vanilla extract for a full minute before realizing I had no reason to be there. I'd planned on baking Ethan's favorite lemon bundt cake to bring to the rehearsal. Dinner, a tradition since he was 10, but now I wasn't even invited. Still, I walked the aisles out of habit, picking up the same butter and sugar I'd bought for years, because part of me still couldn't believe this was really happening. At checkout, the cashier, Lisa, the same girl who's worked there since. She was in high school, smiled, and asked if I was excited for the big weekend. "Ethan, getting married, right? Whole town's buzzing." I nodded and muttered something about being busy, but inside, I felt like I was melting from the inside out. It wasn't just the exclusion. It was the way everyone assumed I'd be. There. That's how deep I'd always been woven into this family's fabric. I paid for the groceries I no longer needed, drove home in silence, and placed the ingredients in the pantry, like maybe someday soon I'd find a reason to use them. That night, I opened Facebook for the first time in weeks. I usually avoid it, but curiosity got the better of me. Jenna had posted a photo. a black and white shot of Ethan and her on the beach during their engagement shoot, captioned, "This weekend, we say I do." Surrounded by those who've shown up for us, supported us, and loved us unconditionally. The comments were full of heart emojis and congratulations, but one from Jenna's cousin made my blood freeze. "So glad you cut out the toxic energy." "Blood isn't always family." Another chimed in, "Proud of you for protecting your peace." My stomach turned. I clicked through her photos and found a whole album titled Final Prep, showing the bridal shower rehearsal dinner, set up even a shot of the welcome bags I paid for. Custom monogrammed totes filled with local snacks and handwritten notes I had printed months ago. Not once was I tagged. Not once was I mentioned. Then I saw a short video shot inside my own living room months earlier when I hosted the engagement planning dinner. It was posted without my knowledge, cropped just enough to cut me out. But I recognized my wallpaper, my tea set, even the vase Ethan made me in 3rd grade sitting on the mantel. They'd erased me with surgical precision. I closed the app and sat in silence until the room felt too loud. I walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer where I keep old notes, and pulled out a card from Ethan, handwritten from his high school graduation. "Grandma, you're the reason I believe in family. You've been there every step. I hope I make you proud." I folded it back carefully and slid it into my coat pocket like armor. The next morning, I dropped off a tin of cookies at their doorstep. No note this time, just a ribbon and a label with Ethan's name. It wasn't for forgiveness or acknowledgement. It was a statement. I was still here. I still existed. And I would not disappear quietly. That same afternoon, Ava texted me, "Docs are ready. When you're ready, we make the move." I stared at that message for a long time before replying, "Monday, first thing." And just like that, the countdown began, not to a wedding, but to a reckoning. The morning after I sent that message to Ava, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity, like my body had finally caught up with a decision my heart made days ago. I dressed in slacks and a clean blouse, combed my hair neatly, and put on the gold earrings Tom gave me for our anniversary. In 1982, the ones I only wear when I need to remind myself who I used to be before life chipped away at my softness. Ava picked me up at 9 sharp, coffee in hand, briefcase on the seat beside her, and a look in her eyes that said she wasn't going to let anyone bulldoze me ever again. The law office was quiet, tucked into a row of converted brick homes downtown. And the moment we stepped inside, I felt the weight of what I was about to do settle on my shoulders, like a quilt sewn from both heartbreak and resolve. The attorney, a woman named Shannon with a steel voice and kind eyes, greeted us and brought out the documents. We sat in a small conference room with a bowl of mints between us and the soft hum of an overhead fan that reminded me of doctors. "Visits. This," she said, pointing to the top page, "is the revision that removes Caleb Whitman and Jenna Whitman as beneficiaries to the Eleanor Whitman Family Trust. The new recipients will be Ava Collins, effective immediately, and Ethan Whitman, pending the completion of your personal condition." She paused. "Do you still want that clause included?" I nodded. "If he doesn't come to see me face to face within 30 days of today, he gets nothing." Shannon raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She slid the pen toward me. My hand trembled. Just slightly as I signed initials here, signature there, again and again until it was done. Ava added hers as witness. The final page clicked into place as Shannon assembled the folder. "It's now legally binding," she said. "Should anything happen to you, this document takes full effect immediately. But if you change your mind, it can only be undone in person with both parties and notarization." I thanked her, feeling like I'd just sealed my own obituary, but not with regret, with power. As we left the building, Ava handed me an envelope. "This is the fund transfer receipt," she said. $250,000 is already moved into my name, flagged as inheritance transition. It's the test move. If they notice it, and they'll know something's changed. I took the envelope without a word, got into the passenger seat. and watched the trees blur past on the drive home. By dinner time, I was sitting at my kitchen table, watching the sun dip low through the curtains when my phone buzzed. Caleb. I stared at the screen for a full 30 seconds before declining the call. It buzzed again 5 minutes later. Then again. Then a text. "We need to talk. Urgent." I didn't respond. Another message followed. "Is this about the trust Ethan's down payment was in there?" "What's going on, Mom?" I felt something crack inside me. Not sadness, not rage, just a quiet confirmation that they only noticed me when something cost them. I didn't reply. I placed the phone face down, got up, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on the back porch, listening to the cicadas scream into the dusk. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. Not in the way I'd always wanted, but in the way that mattered most now. Let them come find me. Not for a favor, not for money, not for ceremony, but because they finally realized they'd built their whole foundation on someone they never expected to stand up and walk away. The knock came just before noon the next day. 3 short raps on the front door that carried the weight of panic. I didn't have to check the peephole. I knew it was Caleb. I opened the door to find him standing on the porch, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His button-down shirt wrinkled his eyes bloodshot, like he hadn't slept. And behind him, parked on the curb with the engine running, was Jenna's white SUV. She didn't get out. She never would. I didn't say anything, just stepped aside and let him in. He walked into the living room like it was unfamiliar territory, glancing around at the same furniture he grew up with, the same walls that had held his graduation photos and childhood drawings. "I didn't come to fight," he said, voice tight. I need to understand what's going on." I walked past him into the kitchen and started the kettle. "You've been removed from the trust," I said plainly. "Jenna, too. The funds have been reallocated." He followed me, standing in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed to sit. "But why? Why now?" I turned to face him, and for once, I didn't flinch. "You told me not to come to my grandson's wedding. You said it was what everyone wanted, so I listened." His face twisted like he'd been slapped. "It wasn't like that. Jenna said you'd been acting forgetful, that maybe it would be too much stress for you. I didn't want to hurt you." I placed 2 mugs on the counter and poured the tea. "You didn't want to hurt me, but you let her paint me as unstable. You let her cut me out of every event, every conversation, and you let Ethan believe I didn't care enough to show up." He sat down slowly at the table, rubbing his temples. I didn't know about the money for Ethan's house. That down payment was part of the wedding gift. We were counting on that. I stirred honey into my cup, my hands calm, even as my heart pressed against my ribs. "You were counting on money from someone you didn't even want in the room. Tell me how that makes sense." He didn't answer, just stared at the steam rising from his mug. "Mom," he said finally, "this isn't just about hurt feelings anymore. Ethan's devastated. He thought you were ignoring him. Jenna told him you didn't want to be involved, that you were confused, maybe even slipping a little." I laughed once, low and bitter. "She's been laying that groundwork for years, whispering behind my back, twisting everything. And you let her. You stood by while she rewrote our family's history in real time." He looked down at the table like it might give him the words he couldn't find. I didn't know how far. It had gone. I reached for the envelope I'd prepared that morning. Inside was a printed screenshot of the trust summary, a list of disbursements, and a letter I'd written by hand. I slid it across the table. "This is what you're not getting. Not because I want to punish you, but because I needed to remember that I still had a voice in this family." He picked it up with shaking hands, scanned the paper, and when he reached the clause about Ethan needing to visit me in person within 30 days, he looked up confused. "You'd still leave something to Ethan? I met his eyes. Steady. If he chooses to come see me, not because he's forced to, but because he wants to know the truth, then yes, I still believe he can. But not through you. Not through her. He swallowed hard. You don't know what this is going to do. No, I said. You don't know what it already did. We sat in silence until the sound of Jenna honking, once sharp and impatient, cut through the quiet like a blade. Caleb stood slowly clutching the envelope like a lifeline and hesitated before the door. If he comes, let it be on his own terms, I said. Not yours, and not hers. He nodded, eyes glossy, and walked out without another word. I didn't watch him drive away. I just sat back down with my tea still warm and stared at the empty chair across from me where my son had just been. No longer a boy who needed his mother, but a man who finally saw what happened when you let someone else write your mother out of her own story. I didn't expect him to come back the next day, but he did. This time, without Jenna, and without the panic in his voice, just a slow knock and a heavier silence. I opened the door, and Caleb stood there holding a folder like it weighed 100 pounds, his face drawn tight and pale. Can we talk? He asked. I nodded and let him in, but I didn't offer coffee or tea this time. I just sat down in the living room and waited. He took the chair across from me and opened the folder. After I left yesterday, I started digging through our shared accounts emails, even Jenna's cloud backups. I didn't want to believe it, Mom. He pulled out printouts, pages of text messages, social media screenshots, calendar invites, things that had my name on them but weren't sent by me. Fake messages where I supposedly canceled dress fittings or declined brunches. Facebook chats with my name next to snide remarks I never said. She fabricated conversations he said quietly. Told Ethan you said his fiancé was beneath him, that you didn't approve of the wedding. She even edited your voicemails, Mom. Spliced together pieces to make it sound like you were confused or ranting. He handed me a page. It was a transcript of a message I supposedly left where I ranted about being excluded from some tacky little wedding and said they'd regret ever crossing me. But I recognized the tone. The clipped phrasing. None of it sounded like me. She played this for Ethan, he said. That's why he believed it. He thought you didn't want to be there. I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not even sadness, just a dense, cold understanding. I stood and walked to the cabinet near the hallway, where I keep things that matter. I pulled out a flash drive and a printed voicemail transcript of my own, and when I came back, I handed them to him. That's from 2 Christmases ago, I said. Jenna called after too many drinks and forgot she was leaving a message. She said I was a parasite, said you needed to cut me out now before I poisoned Ethan too. I never played it for you. I didn't want to cause trouble. He listened to the recording with his head bowed like he was in church, and when it ended, he didn't speak. For a long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were glassy. She told me you were withdrawing from reality, that you were paranoid. She said you were accusing people of things that didn't happen. I nodded slowly. And you believed her. I didn't want to, he whispered. But I didn't stop her either. I sat down across from him. You let her build a story where I was the villain. Because it was easier than confronting the fact that she might be the one causing the rot. He didn't argue. He just folded the pages back into his folder and stared at the carpet. Does Ethan know? I asked. He nodded. I showed him last night. He's confused, hurt, he cried. Mom! He thought you ghosted him, thought you didn't even want to be at his wedding. I swallowed hard, feeling that deep ache again. The one that comes when you realize your absence was felt but under the wrong story. Then he has a choice, I said. The clause in the trust stands. If he wants to know me again, he knows where to find me. Caleb nodded again, then stood slowly. What happens now? Now, I said. You decide if you're going to be her husband or my son. But either way, I'm done being erased in silence. He walked to the door and paused with his hand on the knob. "If I could undo it, you can't," I said quietly. "But you can stop pretending it didn't happen." And then he left, and I stood there alone, not broken, not boiling, just finally clear-eyed enough to see exactly who had been steering the ship into the iceberg and who'd been clapping from the shore. I didn't hear from Ethan for 3 days after Caleb's visit, and I told myself I wasn't counting. But every time the phone rang, every knock at the door, my breath caught for half a second before I forced myself back to stillness. On the 4th day, just after lunch, he showed up. No warning, just him on my porch holding a folded piece of paper in his hand, wearing that same unsure look he used to have as a boy when he brought home a bad report card. I opened the door slowly and said nothing, just waited. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside, and he walked in like he wasn't sure he belonged anymore, eyes scanning the living room like it was some forgotten museum. "I read everything Dad gave me," he said, stopping in the middle of the room. I listened to that voicemail from Jenna. I didn't know what to think. I wanted to believe none of it was true, but when I confronted her, she didn't even deny it. She said it was for my own good. I stayed quiet, letting him work through it. "I thought you didn't want to be there, Grandma. I thought you were angry at me, or that maybe you weren't doing well and didn't want the stress. I didn't know how much of it was fake." He looked down at the paper in his hand and unfolded it. It was a photo of us taken when he was about 6, both of us covered in flour after baking cookies. His arms wrapped around my neck, both of us laughing. "This has been in my wallet for years," he said. "Every time I was scared or unsure or even just stressed out, I'd pull it out and look at it. And then for the past month, I've been telling myself maybe it didn't mean what I thought. It did, because that's what she wanted me to think." I sat down on the couch and motioned for him to join me. "She's clever," I said. "She didn't just tell you lies, she told them in my voice. She used your trust against you." He nodded, swallowing hard, and I let her. I looked him dead in the eye. "You did. But now you're here. So what are you going to do about it?" He blinked, surprised. "I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out. I know the wedding's this weekend, and I know it's probably too late for everything, but It's not too late," I interrupted. "The clause is still in place. You showed up. You came to me not to fix money, but to find the truth. That's all I needed." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. "I didn't come because of the money, I swear. I came because I miss you. Because I couldn't let this version of you be the last one I believed in." I reached over and took his hand, the same hand I used to hold when crossing the street. "Then we start again, but not through her." "Not through anyone else, just us." He nodded, and for the first time in what felt like years, I saw my grandson again. Not the polished adult version trained by someone else, but the boy who used to help me fold laundry while singing off-key. We sat there in quiet for a while before he finally stood up. "I should go," he said, "but I'll be back before the wedding." I walked him to the door, and just as he stepped out, he turned back. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If she hadn't lied, if everything had gone normal, would you have still given me the money?" I smiled faintly. "If everything had gone normal, I wouldn't have needed to." He nodded slowly, like he understood more than I said, then walked to his car and drove away. And as I stood there watching him leave, I realized that maybe, just maybe, the story I was being written out of wasn't finished yet. The next evening, I was standing in the frozen food aisle trying to decide between chicken pot pie and lasagna when I heard her voice behind me, low and sharp like a blade wrapped in silk. "Nice to see you out and about, Eleanor." I turned, And there she was. Jenna, arms folded, lips pressed into that perfect half smile she wore when she wanted to pretend she hadn't just gutted someone. I didn't respond, just waited. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. That little stunt with the trust real mature. You think this proves something? I placed the pot pie in my basket and met her eyes. I think it proves you underestimated the wrong woman, she scoffed. You've spent your whole life clinging to Caleb and Ethan like they owe you something. You think because you paid for a few things, you get to control everyone. I didn't blink. I gave more than money. I gave years. Time. Love. You rewrote history and expected me to thank you for the edits. She leaned in. I didn't rewrite anything. I just cleaned up the narrative. You were always the martyr. Always the poor widow who needed a pedestal. Caleb needed space. Ethan needed boundaries. You made everything about you. I studied her carefully, searching for a crack in her mask. You told him I had memory issues. You told people I was unstable. She didn't flinch. Because you are. Who makes their grandson jump through legal hoops just to get what they're owed. I took a breath, feeling the tightness in my chest harden into something unmovable. You don't get to decide what I owe anyone. Ethan came to me on his own. He saw through you. Her jaw tightened. You poisoned him against me. I shook my head slowly. You did that all by yourself. You forgot one thing. Manipulation always leaves fingerprints. And eventually the light finds them. She looked like she wanted to spit. But then she smirked instead. Enjoy your little victory. It won't last. Caleb's still my husband. Ethan's still my stepson. And you're still alone. I smiled, calm and unshaken. Maybe. But I'm alone with my name intact. I walked past her without waiting for a response, left the cart behind, and drove home with nothing but silence and adrenaline in my veins. That night, just before midnight, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. One line. I have the recording. She admitted everything. I sat down slowly, rereading his words until they blurred. He followed up. I didn't even ask. She just went off. Said you always turn people against her. I recorded the whole thing. My fingers hovered over the screen. Send it to your dad first, I replied. He needs to hear it from her mouth, not mine. He wrote back immediately. Already did. He hasn't responded. I stared out the window, watching a moth flutter against the glass, stupidly drawn to a light it would never reach. Caleb would hear the truth now. Unfiltered, unedited. Not through me. Not through denial. From her own voice. The woman he'd chosen. The one he defended. Now exposing herself without even realizing it. I thought about the years I spent biting my tongue. The sacrifices made invisible. The ways I'd made excuses for everyone else's cruelty just to keep the peace. But peace had never really existed. It was just silence draped over rot. Now, the silence was gone. And what came next would finally be honest. 2 days later, Caleb called and asked to set a time for everyone to meet. Me, him, Ethan, Jenna, Ava. And to my surprise, my late husband's sister Darla, who I hadn't spoken to in over a year. We need to get everything in the open, he said. His voice flat like a man who finally saw the fire burning the walls he helped build. I agreed, but only on my terms. My house, my time, my rules. The meeting was set for Sunday afternoon. I spent that morning setting out chairs in the living room, arranging folders on the coffee table, one for each of them, each holding copies of the trust amendment, screenshots of Jenna's fabricated texts, the bank transaction logs, and transcripts of voicemail recordings, including the most recent, one Ethan had sent me, where Jenna ranted for 3 full minutes about how I'd infected the family with victimhood and made everyone feel guilty for being successful. By the time they arrived, I wasn't nervous. I was prepared. Caleb walked in first, shoulders stiff, eyes tired. Ethan followed, expression unreadable. Jenna came in last without eye contact, her mouth pressed into a thin line. Ava was all ready, seated beside me, calm and alert. Darla walked in holding a notebook and a pen like she'd been preparing to take depositions. I waited until everyone sat before I spoke. I want to make something clear. This isn't about revenge. This is about accountability. I handed each person a folder. What you'll find inside is documentation of the last 6 months. Calls I never received. Messages I never sent. Conversations that never happened, but were used to exclude me from my own family's moments. Jenna rolled her eyes. This is absurd. You're treating this like a courtroom. I looked directly at her. You're right, because that's what you've been running from. Proof, facts, and people who don't forget the truth just because you rewrite it out loud. Caleb opened his folder and stared at the contents silent. Ethan sat beside him, already having read most of it, but now seeing the full scope laid bare. Ava cleared her throat. Every financial disbursement is documented. Every trust transfer. The clause that required Ethan to meet with Eleanor was legal and now fulfilled. Jenna turned to Caleb. Are you really going to sit here and let them do this to me? Caleb didn't look up. You lied, he said, voice low. To me, to Ethan, to everyone, and I let you. Oh, give me a break, she snapped. She's been playing the martyr for decades. Darla leaned forward. You might want to reconsider your tone. I saw what's in those folders. It matches what I remember from years ago. This isn't new, Jenna. You've just gotten sloppier. Jenna's face flushed red. Of course you're siding with her. You never liked me. No, Darla said. I just see patterns, and I've seen this one before. Caleb finally looked at me. I don't know how to fix this. You don't, I replied. But you start by not protecting it anymore. Ethan spoke next, his voice steady. I'm still marrying her, but not blind. And not at the cost of the people who stood then and walked to my side, placing one hand on my shoulder. And in that small gesture, I felt more seen than I had in months. Jenna let out a breathless laugh like the room had turned against her and she couldn't find the script anymore. This is insane. You people are buying into a narrative built on paranoia and guilt. I met her eyes, calm and direct. No, we're finally rejecting one built on silence and fear. Caleb stood now, too slower than Ethan, but steady. I think you should leave, Jenna, he said, not loud, but loud enough that the room froze. She stared at him like he just punched her, then laughed again, but this time it cracked down. The middle. You're seriously kicking me out. I'm asking you to step out so the rest of us can speak honestly without being manipulated again, he replied. She grabbed her purse, muttering something under her breath, and stormed out, the front door slamming behind her like a final punctuation. Caleb didn't sit again. He just looked around the room like he was finally seeing the damage, the rot beneath the carpet they'd all walked over too long. I should have stopped this sooner, he said, but I kept thinking it would get better, that it was just stress or miscommunication. I didn't want to believe I'd handed over my mother's dignity in exchange for peace. I nodded once, the only acknowledgement I could give without breaking. You believed comfort over clarity, I said. It's what most people choose until it costs too much. Darla closed her notebook. What now? She asked. I reached for the final envelope on the table and passed it to Caleb. This is my last revision, I said. It removes you permanently from the trust. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because trust isn't money. It's the belief. Someone will protect your name even when you're not in the room. And you didn't. He opened it, read it, and nodded slowly. I understand. Ethan looked between us, hesitant. And me? I reached into my pocket and handed him a single sheet. His reinstatement signed and notarized that morning. You earned it, I said, by showing up, by asking questions, by seeing me again. He held the paper like it was more than legal. It was personal. And it was. Caleb folded the envelope and placed it back on the table. Whatever happens with Jenna, I don't expect anything. But I do want to say I'm sorry. Not just for this, but for all the ways I let her take your place. I didn't speak. I just watched him for a long moment and said, "The apology isn't the end, Caleb. It's the beginning. But only if your actions change too." He nodded, eyes shining, then turned and walked toward the front door without needing to be told. And as it closed behind him, I exhaled, not in relief, but in finality. This wasn't a battle I won. It was a war I survived. And the battlefield, for once, belonged to the truth. The wedding came and went a week later, and I didn't attend. Not because I wasn't welcome anymore, but because I chose not to go. I'd seen enough, endured enough. And what I needed from this family wasn't a photo in their album or a polite smile at a reception I helped fund. What I needed was already happening quietly in the space they never thought I'd claim for myself. Ethan came to visit the day after the ceremony. He wore the same suit, but without the tie, and carried 2 slices of leftover wedding cake in a bakery box. We sat on the porch in the late afternoon sun, eating in silence for a while, until he finally said, "It wasn't the same without you." I nodded, not needing to respond. "She kept her distance," he added. "Dad told her if she so much as looked at you sideways again, he'd file for separation. She didn't take it well." I looked at him carefully. "And you?" He shrugged. "I don't know yet. We're married." I love her. But I'm seeing things now I didn't let myself see before. It's hard to look at someone the same after hearing them lie in your grandmother's voice. I let that sit, not rushing him. But I'm glad I saw it. I'm glad I came to you before it was too late. I smiled gently. That's what love looks like, showing up before the door closes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photo of us I'd seen earlier. The flour-covered, cookie-smeared snapshot of us laughing in my old kitchen. "I had it in my wallet at the altar," he said. "Not for luck. For truth. Because you're the reason I know how to love someone without expecting anything in return." My throat tightened, but I held it down. "Keep it there," I said. "And don't let anyone convince you again that protecting someone means hiding from the truth." He nodded slowly. "What about Dad?" I looked away. That's between him and himself now. He made his choices. I'm not here to manage the aftermath anymore. I'm just here to live the rest of my life on my terms. Ethan didn't argue. He understood. We sat until the sun started dipping low behind the trees, until the bugs came out and the air turned cooler. When he finally stood to leave, he hugged me tight. Not like a goodbye, but like a reset. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." After he left, I walked back inside, took the wedding invitation out of the drawer where I'd hidden it, and slid it into a photo album, right next to the legal documents that changed everything. I wasn't erasing history. I was recording it properly. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, turned off my phone, and sat in my favorite chair by the window, watching the world settle around me. No noise, no pretense, just peace. The kind you earn when you finally stop asking people to see your worth and start living like they never had to in the first place.